My girlfriend refuses to do anything with her life and just lives off me. She wouldn't let me break up with her no matter how many times I tried. So I had to take extreme measures to finally get my way. You know, there are moments in life when you realize everything you thought you knew, everything you built, is just crumbling around you. For me, that moment came 2 years ago when the woman I loved, my girlfriend, dropped out of college. What followed was a slow, agonizing descent into a life I barely recognized, a life where I worked 50, 60 hours a week just to keep us afloat while she became a shadow of herself, convinced she was too pretty to work. It sounds harsh, I know, but the anger and frustration just simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect storm. That storm hit one evening. I walked in at 6 p.m., exhausted from a brutal day, only to find her exactly where I expected, buried in bed, surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers, not a shower taken, not a tooth brushed. Her only exertion that day had been reaching for the delivery at the door. Seeing that, after the day I'd had, it just snapped something inside me. I raised my voice, telling her she couldn't live like this, that it wasn't fair. And her response? She lashed out, physically. In that instant, all I wanted was out. I wanted to end it right then and there. But then came the tears, the desperate pleas, the I have no one else guilt trip that always worked. So I stayed. She retreated back to bed, and a few hours later, I tried again. I told her, as gently as I could, that I just couldn't do it anymore. My mental health was on the line. I didn't care who she turned to, but I couldn't be with her. The guilt trip came again, but this time, it didn't land. And that's when it got terrifying. She sprang out of bed, ran to the kitchen, grabbed a pair of scissors, and threatened to end her life. I couldn't risk it. I agreed to stay. She's sleeping now, and I've made my decision. If she ever pulls that stunt again, it's over. And if she goes through with it, that's on her, not me. The next night, as we were getting ready for bed, I just stood there, fully dressed. We need to talk, I said. She was still smiling at first, bouncing on the bed like a kid, thinking I wasn't serious. But then, she saw it in my eyes. The mood shifted. I told her something wasn't right. I'd tried, I really had for years to be patient, to make this work. But I couldn't keep waiting for her to get a job, go back to school, or just find a hobby. It gnawed at me, this complete lack of self-care, this absence of goals or aspirations. For the first time in a long time, she was actually listening. And then, she shocked me. She agreed with everything. She started suggesting places to apply, courses she might like, even offered to let me watch her submit applications online, just to prove she wasn't lying. I was in disbelief. A part of me, a foolish part, actually thought this was it. This was the moment she would change. That made the next part even harder. I started by telling her I didn't love her the same way. Slowly, painfully, it escalated until I admitted I felt nothing at all for the relationship. I was jaded, tired, and desperate for a fresh start with someone who actually wanted something more out of life. When the realization hit her, she broke. Tears streamed down her face. "Why didn't you say this sooner?" she sobbed. I reminded her of all the times I'd asked her to cook, to go out, to try something new, even offered to pay for her classes. Anything. She understood that, she said, but she was upset I hadn't told her my interest was fading. From her perspective, she thought I still loved her. She apologized, blaming her mental state, saying nothing motivated her, that the only thing she looked forward to was me coming home. None of it moved me, just made me profoundly uncomfortable. I tried to continue, suggesting her lifestyle might be better with someone else, but she cut me off, her panic rising. She promised to be a better girlfriend, to go wherever I wanted, to find courses in August. She just couldn't lose me. She had nothing else. The tears, the snot, it was a mess. I told her we'd talk when she calmed down. An hour later, we did. She pleaded for 2 months, a chance to change, promising, swearing she'd be better. She rattled off a list of places she'd apply, vowed to be a better partner. I never wanted to make her homeless, so it seemed like a compromise, even with my doubts. I reaffirmed I wanted to see other people, but she was even more insistent on fixing us than on her aspirations. "Just give me a month," she begged, "to make this relationship work." She kept asking what she could do to make me love her again, how she could stop me from hating her. She said losing me, the only person she had, was the worst part. She looked like she was about to completely shatter, so I just said, "Okay, we'll see how things are in a month." In my head, if I was giving her 2 months to get on her feet, a month would be enough for her to accept things. I didn't want her to have a complete mental breakdown while I was still living there. I slept on the couch that night, and I've been there ever since. Around 3 a.m., she came out, wanting to talk more, but I was exhausted. I told her we'd talk tomorrow. She then slept on the floor beside me, apologizing again. When I told her to stop, she just silently sobbed under her blanket. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I regret nothing. Letting it all out felt like a massive weight lifted. I don't know what the next 2 months will bring, but I was firm. That's the deadline. Last night, she suggested something she saw on TikTok, couples putting a phone on a table with a timer to air grievances. I told her that was dumb. If we were going to talk, there shouldn't be a time limit. She agreed and told me to go first. She asked when I completely lost my love for her. I told her it wasn't one moment, but a slow, grinding feeling that just got worse. Then she asked when I felt the most angry. It took me a few minutes, but then it just started pouring out. The worst time, I told her, was when I first started at the hospital. The pace was brutal. Constant work, no downtime, always learning new things that school never taught me, all while being expected to be a professional. It was, without a doubt, the most stressed I've ever been. Any other RNs out there will get it. That year hardened me, made me believe that hard work pays off if you have the drive. And that's when my feelings for her started to vanish the fastest. Coming home to her doing absolutely nothing. No food made. No job. Not learning anything. Just glued to the internet with nothing to show for it. It made me furious. I told her that I'd suggested easy jobs, less demanding majors, even just cooking or finding a hobby, and every single attempt was rejected. I told her flat out, it disgusted me. She asked why I didn't make it a bigger issue, why I didn't communicate. And I just stared at her. Some things shouldn't have to be said, I told her. I shouldn't have to remind you to wash your ass, to eat, to do something other than mindlessly scroll on your phone for hours every day. I explained that after coming home from the hospital, especially on those high-stress days, the absolute last thing I wanted was to beg my girlfriend to be productive. So I held my tongue. I settled. She was still nice, still caring, and I had no other reason to end it. And so, the resentment just festered. It was around then that I started to become meaner, something I regret now, but I'm putting it all out there. I told her that when she dropped nursing, I was upset because I thought she was capable of what I did. But after spending more time with her, truly getting to know her, I realized she never could have finished. That's why I suggested easier, more laid-back jobs, less demanding majors. Even if she just cooked or found an interesting hobby, I would have appreciated it. But she chose to do nothing. For years. That's just the kind of person she was, and why I was done with her romantically. She asked if I hated her. I said I didn't know. I told her she was loving and kind, but I hated how she'd handled her life. After airing everything out, I felt no ill will, but also nothing else. I was just done, ready to move on. We held eye contact the whole time. There were moments she looked like she'd break, but she stayed as calm as she could. I told her I was finished, and it was her turn. But she just asked if we could continue later and locked herself in our room for the rest of the day. The next day, we sat down again. She told me she thought she was depressed. She hadn't felt sad before that night, just had no motivation. Some people had messaged me to ask if she should get tested for ADHD, but when I brought it up, she was incredibly adamant she wasn't comfortable with it. I knew she didn't like needles or hospitals, but her flat-out refusal to get tested for disorders, even when I told her it wasn't like a regular hospital visit, surprised me. She asked if her changing would give her another chance. I told her I didn't know. I felt nothing right now, and I didn't know if her efforts would bring any feeling back, especially since it took me hitting my breaking point for her to even try. She asked if there was any compromise. I repeated, if in a month I felt there was enough reason to stay, I would. But there were no guarantees my feelings would return, though I would match any effort she put out. She was frustrated, but I stood firm. Then, she handed me a piece of paper. It was a list she'd been working on last night, hobbies and interests she wanted to explore, mainly photography and cooking. She showed me her phone, proof she was applying for entry-level positions on Indeed and Glassdoor. I told her that if she could show enough passion or interest in these hobbies, I wouldn't care about her working. Just anything to improve herself. But if she did nothing, then she'd need to find a new job to help her when she moved out. My coworkers, two amazing women I trust completely, had been telling me I'd get love-bombed and that this would all go back to how it was. They insisted I stand firm. They're incredibly grounded, and they even offered for me to stay with them, convinced I'd fall for her manipulation if I stayed here. It didn't feel right, being technically still in a relationship, but I said I'd consider it if things got worse. Despite all the warnings, I wanted to give it one last try. I felt guarded, indifferent, but I was willing to try. I'd already cut off sex, sleeping in the living room, but she still came out every night and slept on the floor right below me, even when I told her I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. She just wouldn't accept it. The first week was a whirlwind. She was incredibly proactive, a manic influx of energy. She tried to get interested in so many different things. I kept my promise, meeting her halfway, helping wherever I could. The only real interest that stuck was photography. She'd sold some old clothes on Depop to buy a Canon 250D, which she said was good for beginners. She'd researched it way more than me. I strongly suspected she stuck with it because it gave her a chance to spend more time with me, constantly asking me to go out into the city to take pictures. Since I'd promised to match her energy, I did, even after long shifts. Her behavior changed drastically. She was always loving, but now it was dialed up to the max 8 times a day. She'd ask how I was, if I was upset, what I wanted to do. Just constantly trying to gauge my mood. When we went out, her PDA was maxed out too. Kissing, holding hands, wanting to stay out as long as possible, even when I had to be up early for work. It's hard to describe, but it felt like a relentless torrent. I don't know if it was textbook love bombing, but with that much energy, I knew a crash was coming. And it did. By the second week, I couldn't handle it anymore. I needed a break, especially with how I was still feeling after everything. My friends at work were my only other outlet, and I'd told them everything. They warned me again, love bombing, just like we said. It'll only get worse. They asked what I'd do if I was stuck with her longer than 2 months. My lease was ending soon, I told them, which was a relief. I wouldn't mind moving if this all went south, and it gave her a heads up. They were concerned I was coming to work more tired than usual, and it was noticeable. But I told them I was fine. That weekend, they insisted I go out with them to lift my spirits, saying too much time at home wasn't good for me. I declined at first, but when they asked again, I agreed. And honestly, I had a really good time. It helped my mood considerably. Of course, my girlfriend wondered where I'd been all day. I told her I'd been with friends. She was disappointed, but I promised we'd spend all day tomorrow together. I still get messages telling me to drop my friends, that they're manipulating me. But I know them. They're good people who look out for me. They played a huge part in me quitting smoking this year, which, despite making me anxious sometimes, has massively improved my health. There's a different kind of bond you form with people in our line of work. I trust my coworkers with my life. When I said the crash was coming, I was right. It was ugly, loud, and parts of it could have been prevented. When I wrote my last update, I wasn't in the right headspace, so reflecting on the week before helped calm my nerves. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit I started smoking again, but it helped my mental state, which was teetering on the edge of a crash. I couldn't tell my friends about this breakdown. I didn't want them to step in. There was a point during one of our city outings when she was in a bad mood. When we got home, she accused me of being dismissive, asking if I was angry about her trying to be better. I told her I was getting uncomfortable with her constant need for affirmation and affection. It was relentless. She was still sleeping in the living room, so I had no time alone at home, and all the outings were physically and emotionally draining. Truthfully, I was just physically tired, and my coworkers and she both say it shows on my face worse than it is. She took it hard, didn't talk to me for the rest of that day or the next, but she was brooding. Maybe I should have apologized or communicated better then. It might have prevented a lot. But instead, I took the time to nap and be alone, something I hadn't had a chance to do in over a week. Then came the third day. A lot happened. A lot was said. This was the breaking point that caused even more problems the following week. I woke up and left for work without saying goodbye or speaking to her. I was almost late. There's so much that can be said about how those 2 weeks made me feel about our situation and everything that happened, but I can't convey it in words, much less writing. All I can say is it was a lot of time to think. Since I've recovered, I've been trying to make a bigger effort to talk with her, but at the same time, not trying to make it feel forced, like it might have a month ago. Just random conversations about random things, how her photos were going, how work was doing, if she liked her boss. Whatever. She started spending less time in her room and more time in the living room with me when I got home, just talking about her day, work, customers, coworkers. And in turn, I told her about mine. Gradually, over these weeks, it feels like the transition from being in a relationship to being friends is much more apparent, and it feels better, more organic this way. It's become easier to communicate, even though there's still this barrier between us, something that formed from our final argument. It's hard to describe, but it's there. The deadline I set for moving out is the end of September, when my lease ends. The end of September arrived quickly, and my lease was set to expire. I had made my decision. I wasn't renewing it. I needed a fresh start, away from her and the memories of our relationship. I'd been contemplating this for weeks, and while I was grateful for the moments of connection we shared during my recovery, I knew I couldn't stay. On the last Saturday of the month, I told her, "It's time for me to leave." I explained my reasons, trying to keep my tone calm and steady. I needed to focus on myself, on my future, and living together just wasn't an option anymore. I watched her expression change as the words sank in. The tears started, and the argument erupted almost immediately. She accused me of abandoning her, of not caring about everything we'd been through. She yelled that I was throwing away our love for no reason, that she couldn't understand why I would leave when we'd been getting along better. I tried to respond calmly, but her accusations stung. I told her I wasn't abandoning her. I was taking care of myself. As the argument escalated, she became more frantic. I could see the pain and anger in her eyes, and it twisted into something frightening. In a moment of pure rage, she lunged at me. I didn't see it coming. I was caught off guard, and before I knew it, she struck me across the face. I stumbled back, shocked and confused by her sudden aggression. Realizing what she'd just done, she froze, her expression shifting from anger to panic. She started to apologize, but all I felt was the sting of betrayal. I left the room to collect myself, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through me. I didn't know what to do. After a few minutes, I decided to leave the apartment to clear my head. I drove aimlessly, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. I ended up at a nearby hospital after calling a friend who insisted I get checked out. I sat in the waiting room, feeling ashamed and utterly confused. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I knew I needed to be seen. After a quick examination, they confirmed I was fine physically, but suggested I take some time to think about the emotional impact. I stayed there for a few hours, mostly in silence, reflecting on everything that had transpired between us. The reality of our situation felt clearer now. Once I was released, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and a strange sense of relief. I realized I had to reach out to her one last time. I sent her a message. I wouldn't be pressing charges. I didn't want to escalate things further, but I needed to make my stance clear. Stay away from me. Forever. I reminded her she had a lifeline, but she needed to use it wisely. No more contact. I was ready to move on, and I hoped she could find a way to heal as well. I hit send, and an odd sense of calm washed over me. It was finally over. I packed my things the next day and moved out. I left behind the memories, the arguments, and the love that had once existed. It was time for me to start fresh, away from everything that had been holding me back. I didn't look back as I closed the door for the last time. I at least checked on her. She'd been sleeping in our room for a few days since her mood dropped. My mood was actually higher than usual at work. I was rested, had my alone time, and was genuinely having a good time at the hospital, which was rare. A few times, my coworkers would go out to eat after work, and I'd been declining for weeks. But that day, I joined them. I got home around 9 p.m. or later, pretty late, and I'd had a few drinks. This is where it gets hard to write. I walked in, and there she was, sitting in the living room, staring directly at me. Not on her phone, not watching TV. Just sitting as if staring at a wall. It startled me. I asked what she was doing. She asked where I'd been. Out with friends, I said. She knows I work mostly with women, and I'd mentioned my coworkers before. Were they your friends from work? She asked. Yes, I said. We went out to eat. She asked if I'd been drinking. I don't know if it was obvious or just a random question, but I admitted I had. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, feeling like an eternity. Eventually, she brought up the 1-month deadline. Have your feelings changed? She asked. It caught me off guard. It took a minute to reply. I told her I appreciated her efforts, but I was still unsure about our future and I couldn't give her a direct answer. She accused me again of being dismissive during our outings, of not putting in the same effort. I asked what she meant. I was going out with her whenever she asked, matching her effort in finding hobbies. To me, it just sounded like neediness. I think that's when she started to lose it. Her voice wavered. She asked if I was aware I wasn't smiling when we were out, that I was quiet, rarely talked. I told her she already knew how I felt, so my mixed feelings shouldn't be a surprise. But I also explained, again, that my lack of talking was just from being tired from work. I don't think she believed me. She told me she was constantly overthinking how I felt now that she knew I'd lost feelings, and she didn't know what to do to get them back. I told her, again, to just find a passion. Anything. To get out of bed and be active. She said it had been 2 weeks, and she'd been as active as she possibly could, to the point it was causing her mental stress. But my mood wasn't improving, and she wondered if anything would actually change now that it was almost a month. And then came the full breakdown. Through tears and a broken voice, she screamed about how much she loved me, how much affection and love she'd given me, just for me to throw it all away over something as stupid as my conditions. As if it was just an excuse to end things, as if I'd never loved her at all. She went on, saying that even with how upset, hurt, and betrayed she felt by the one person she had, she still loved me and wanted to continue. She told me there would be nothing for her if I left. No one. No place. No future. Her will to live would be gone. She wouldn't know what to do. There was so much I could have said, but I can't accurately convey how hard she was breaking down. She was almost screaming, completely bawling, and it just froze me. I'd never seen her fall apart like that. She kept repeating there was no reason to live if this was the end. It wouldn't matter what job she got. Another month wouldn't be enough. She knew I still wouldn't want to be with her, and she would have nothing. After everything was said, she locked herself in our room again and stayed there for a few more days. Whenever I knocked to talk, she screamed for me to go away. And I did. A few days later, she finally calmed down enough for us to speak. Her attitude had done a complete 180. She was still upset, but incredibly apologetic for what she'd done and said, insisting it was just in the moment. The days I spent alone, without her or my friends, finally gave me the mental space to do what I should have done a month ago. I told her, as gently and calmly as I could, that it was over. There was no chance. I no longer wanted to be in a relationship. I told her I would let her stay for an additional 2 months, until she could find a job and get on her feet. And if she couldn't do anything by then, I would be gone. She started to cry again, but this time, it was a defeated sob that almost broke me. But she agreed to the terms. It was finally done. She actually got a part-time job at a supermarket about a week later. After our final confrontation, our speaking terms were pretty much dead. When she was off work, she'd be in her room alone. I stayed on the couch. I was used to it by then. It feels wrong, selfish even, to say, but for a bit, I felt incredibly free and happy. I didn't tell my coworkers about the breakup right away, just vaguely said we were working on it. But during that time, I started going out with them a lot more after work. Staying in our apartment felt like a chore, depressing. I'd hit a high I hadn't felt in a long while. And then, everything came crashing down. The very next week, I contracted pneumonia. I was off work for 2 weeks to recover. At first, I thought it was just a cold, but then it hit me like a brick. My lungs felt like they were at 50% capacity. I couldn't take a deep breath without a coughing fit, and I was constantly fatigued. Even now, as I write this, with most symptoms gone, I still need an inhaler sometimes. For most of those sick days, I was sleeping 12 to 14 hours, and when I was awake, I was lying down. When I told her what I had, and she saw how sick I was, she offered me the bedroom again. I refused, said I was fine. Since she was working part-time, she still had a lot of time at home. For the first few days, she left me alone. But towards the middle of that first week, she started checking on me, asking if I was okay, if I wanted anything to eat. Honestly, I hated that me being sick forced us to interact. Not because I was mad, but because it felt incredibly weird and awkward. And I had to depend on her now, just a week after we'd broken up. I wasn't well enough to get groceries, and since she worked at a supermarket, she insisted she'd buy food. When I offered my card, she refused, saying she'd buy it herself. I was mostly snacking on fruit and cookies, but she said if I was going to get better, I needed real meals. So, she started cooking for me, even when I said I didn't want anything. Even with this, we didn't eat together for the first week. She'd go back to her room after checking on me. But at the start of the second week of me being home, she started to sit down with me while I was awake and just talk. She told me about her day at work, her coworkers, a bunch of other stuff. It felt like things she'd wanted to tell me earlier but couldn't because everything was still raw. And once she started talking, she didn't stop. Honestly, I enjoyed listening. It felt different. It went from talking to us watching TV together on nights I couldn't sleep, to us just talking about the issues we'd been holding on to for a while. It was incredibly cathartic. No yelling, no arguing, just listening. It was a way we hadn't talked in a long, long time. Not since before we got together, when we were just friends and classmates. Sometime during that second week, I hit a point where I felt extremely ill. I didn't want to talk or do anything, but I couldn't sleep because I kept coughing. She didn't go to work that day. She just stayed beside me for a long while. We didn't talk at all, but she made sure I was still eating and drinking water.